Today we're at Bedrock Vineyard and we're standing in our one of our blocks that we're in the middle of developing. So currently we're in the stage of ripping the vines out of the ground. Before, this block was a continuous block of cab. It was planted on AXR, so along with phylloxera and being kind of pushed at its cropping limits for a while, it had slowly started to yield a lot less. So it had been planted with the idea that it would be a high producing cab block, and for Bedrock Wine Company, it wasn't exactly the type of block that we want to bring into the winery. So with this idea, we're working with Morgan to just plant it a little more intentionally as blocks and fruit that's actually going to be taken by Bedrock Wine Company. Thinking a little bit more about the types of soils and the climate that we're in. So the soil that we're dealing with here is the Tuscan cobbly loam. It's fairly restrictive, which was probably why the cab also started to producing less.
And compared to the side of the ranch where the old vines are, this is a much shallower soil. Our ultimate goal is to dry farm this field, and what that means when you have a shallow soil like this is we'll need to be doing some deeper ripping or breaking up of the subsoil, especially down the rows where the vines are going to be planted. So hopefully we can break through that cemented layer, break through some of those clays, and then incorporate a lot of compost. We're looking at putting out about 20 tons per acre out here, which is just a massive dose. And it's a massive investment, but these kinds of initial investments, when you're looking at a vineyard that is supposed to last decades upon decades, are all kind of worth it. And the other thing is, when you establish a vineyard head trained, your establishment costs are much lower, specifically head trained without a trellis. So, I mean, the way this field will go is essentially stakes will be put into the ground at 9x6 spacing, and beyond that, I mean, that's the only infrastructure aside from a wire to put a drip line for water while the vines are young, and that's about it. We're not dealing with all the wires, all the T-posts, and the hardware that goes into establishing a trellised vineyard. So our initial costs are actually quite low. So now that allows us to put in extra money to things like compost and the amendments that a field like this needs.
And fallow time and cover crops.
Yeah, this field will get fallowed for at least a couple winters. Fallow time is really important to reduce populations of pathogens, soil-borne pathogens of grapes. So by removing as many vine roots as we can and planting diverse cover crops, we're going to change the diversity of the microbes in the soil. So what that'll do is kind of push out the nematodes that have been feasting on these vines for years. By putting out different root systems and different kinds of plants, their niche within the ecosystem is going to be reduced. So this will get 2 winter fallows, which includes a leguminous nitrogenous cover crop of beans and vetch with cereal grains for biomass, and then that'll get turned in and we'll move into a springtime brassica-based cover crop, which is meant for something called biofumigation, which is essentially, it's a way of reducing pathogenic nematodes without inputting noxious chemicals, which is the way things used to be done. But you can grow brassica cover crops, specifically mustard, and at the peak of its bloom, you can turn it under the soil and that'll release gases which reduce plant pathogens. And also these mustards are quite nutritious for other microbes that we want in the soil. And then we're also hoping to put in a summer cover crop, which can include cowpeas and really drought tolerant plants that don't need water, so that we can have a continuous growth of plants and plant matter on this field all year round, and that'll increase organic matter and increase water penetration during the winter.
Yeah, so the deep ripping that Jake was talking about will happen next year, and then we'll have another winter cover crop hopefully before then the year after actually putting plants in the ground, vines in the ground. We're doing dormant bench grafts along with rootstocks that will be field grafted depending on the type of variety that's going in. Some nurseries don't have some varieties available. We want to make sure we're getting the cleanest material as well, so that's intentional of where we're getting our plant material from. We have a couple different rootstocks we're working with too. We got 99R, 110R, and 1103P, and those are kind of the classic drought resistant or drought tolerant rootstocks. But they also are not as deep rooting because we are dealing with shallow soils too. So they are intentionally picked for this site.
So this 11-acre field is going to be split into at least 5, maybe 6 subblocks. The area that we're standing in right now is going to be the mixed black planting. So for this piece, we're essentially trying to replicate the Bedrock Old Vine field blend. So that is based around Zinfandel, but includes Petite Syrah, Carignan, Tempranillo, Syrah, and many, many others. But we are planting all these things out here together as a field blend. And the way we're planting these is with a monicum of intention. So we're not putting them out randomly. As we've seen, as we've mapped these old vine vineyards, is that there seemed to have been a lot of intention with how these field blends were planted. So on a field like this, which actually has a good degree of topography, we have north-facing slopes, south-facing slopes, swales that we're going to plant through. We're going to accentuate varieties in the areas that they work best. So for instance, in the swale, we'll make sure to put our smaller berried varieties, varieties that aren't prone to botrytis, and some of our white varieties down there, because this is a place where we wouldn't want Zinfandel, which is very prone to large berries and botrytis if they're sitting in a wet spot like a swale. And then on the north-facing slopes, we're gonna put our varieties that ripen maybe a little earlier, like Tempranillo, because those slopes should get a little bit less sunlight and should stay a little cooler. And on our south-facing slopes, we're gonna put our really late ripening varieties like Mataro and Carignan that like the heat, can hold their acid in the heat. And by doing this, we're taking something that's heterogeneous by nature and using the topography to try to push it towards a degree of uniformity. Obviously, we don't want complete uniformity. That's why we're doing this in the first place. But by using this, we won't fall all the way off the wagon.
So then we move into more single variety blocks that are a little smaller. We'll have a couple rows of Mourvedre and a few rows of Grenache. We do have a section that will be mixed port varieties, and then we have Trousseau and Negrette and Mondouse. Most things will be head trained on a 9x6. The Negrette and Mondouse will be on some sort of trellis, just because they are recumbent growers, and we do see them in our old field blends, and they like to pretty much grow on the ground, and it makes them a little hard to farm. So we're intentionally putting those in their own blocks to be up on trellis, where I think they'll do a little better. And the acreage of the blocks is also intentional for the fermenter size, where they will go into the winery, because this area is being developed to go into Bedrock Wine Company specifically. So they're all planned out to yield, tons that make sense for our fermenter sizes. We have, up to 10-ton fermenters and down to 2 tons. So the different sizes of the blocks will help that. So we're able to pick them all together and not have to worry about splitting anything up necessarily.
The unifying theme of all these varieties is that they're all Mediterranean varieties. They tend to do well in dry summers, and they tend to do very well in heat. And as our world changes, it's important to be putting effort and thought into varieties like this that can withstand or be resilient in a future of potentially a lot more heat. So varieties like Carignan and Grenache and these Mediterranean Portuguese varieties will be able to stand the test of time on this terroir into the future, where some of the other varieties that have been planted here in the past maybe won't do so well as things change. So these varieties have done well in California, and they're unique in that they should continue to thrive as our climate changes.